Mortal Kombat is one of my favorite games. It's so brutal, gory, and deliciously violent, I can't get enough. The best part of the games, though, are the fatalities, those final moves that just go the extra mile to absolutely destroy your opponent in the most violent way possible. There are so many scary fatalities in the game that we just had to make a list of them, so let's get to counting down the top 10 scariest Mortal Kombat fatalities. At number 10, Goro Torn Apart. Goro is one of the game's original characters. Being featured as sub-bosses in 2 of the franchise's game from its early days, fans know this quad-armed brute as being one of the game's strongest competitors. Goro's fighting style has always revolved around his incredible strength, so it comes as no surprise to see that Goro's fatalities are also strength-based. You know, not everyone can rip their opponent limb from limb as well as Goro does. That's what makes him special. One of his most gruesome and terrifying fatalities comes from Mortal Kombat 9, released in 2011, and is called Torn Apart. Basically, he lifts up his opponent using his forearms to tear the limbs off his opponent, then proceeds to vertically rip them in half straight down the center. It's an absolutely horribly bloody and gruesome scene, but what makes it even more terrifying is the fact that the opponent is still alive when their limbs are being ripped off. You can literally hear them screaming in pain as blood spurts out from where their arms and legs used to be. They only get the sweet release of death once they get torn in half, but even then, Goro starts with their bottom half of their body, so they feel every bone breaking and artery bursting, ripping until the very end. At number 9, Scorpion Nethergate. Scorpion is one of the game's OG characters, is considered as the mascot of the games, and is a fan favorite as well, so when it comes to his fatalities, you know they're going to be dark and twisted enough to satisfy fans. One of his most famous fatalities is the spine rip, but though that sounds terrifying, there are others more gruesome still. The Nethergate fatality from Mortal Kombat 2011 is certainly up there in the scariest fatalities, not necessarily because of the brutality of it, but also because of the mystery. This fatality has Scorpion stabbing his opponent with his dagger, chaining them up, and pushing them through a portal into the Netherrealm. His opponent then comes out of another portal, but their skin has melted off, and they're just a pile of meat on a chain looking like something you'd find in a butcher shop. Now, is it the bloodiest fatality ever? No, but there's just something about the portal that gives me the chills. One has to wonder what happens to the other competitor when they go through the portal. What do they see? What happens to them? All we know is that they get skinned, but how does that happen? What happens in there that tears your skin off? I think it's the unanswered questions that are the most terrifying part of this whole scene. Now, before I continue with the video, let me just give you guys a break from all this gore and ask you guys to give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying it so far, because it really helps the channel out. At number 8, Scorpion's Lair Fatality. You know that feeling when you're drinking a hot beverage and you burn your mouth? That pain and uncomfortable sensation you get? Well, imagine that dialed up to 1000% and the burning sensation is all over your face, and you basically get the Scorpion's Lair or Hell Stage fatality from Mortal Kombat 2011. This fatality isn't special to one character or another, since it's a stage fatality and anyone can perform it by using the stage to perform the fatality move, but it's still utterly disturbing nonetheless. Basically, in this move, the opponent gets uppercutted and pushed into a river of lava, where their head is then forced into the molten rock and pulled out to reveal nothing but a skeleton and lava flowing from their scorched eye sockets. Sounds like a lovely day at the spa, doesn't it? It's scary for a number of reasons. The fact that this person is having their face melted off in a pool of lava, having their screams echo through the map, but also because it must be terrifying to be the one having their face melted off. Can you imagine how horrible that would be? Like, the pain would be excruciating, of course, but imagine the terror you'd be feeling watching your face inch closer to this molten death pit. Absolutely awful. At number 7, Sub-Zero Frozen in Time. Sub-Zero is one of my all-time favorite Mortal Kombat characters. He's just so cool, pun intended. But other than his ice-cold demeanor and the fact that blue certainly is his color, his moves are also downright awful, but in a good way. His fatalities are creative, to say the least. The number of different ways he can kill his opponent just by manipulating ice is pretty impressive, unless you're on the receiving end of those moves, which in that case I doubt you'd have the time to actually appreciate his skill before your untimely demise. He's got a number of scary fatalities like the famous spine rip that caused a lot of uproar back when the Mortal Kombat games were first released because of how graphic they are, but if they thought that was bad, then they would hate to watch Sub-Zero perform the Frozen in Time fatality. In this move, he proceeds to impale his opponent on a spear held by a statue of himself, then goes to rip his opponent's spine out, and then puts their head on the same spike that they're already impaled on. Talk about overkill, am I right? It is gruesome and gory and scary, but that's why I like it. At number 6, Kenshi, Telecopter. Take Daredevil, give him a sword and some telekinesis, and you've got Kenshi. He may look like one of the weaker characters of the Mortal Kombat franchise because the only weapon he really uses is a sword, but don't underestimate him. If given the chance, he will turn you into minced meat without breaking a sweat, and will get an extra fine dice when he uses the Telecopter fatality. Basically, when Kenshi has beaten you up enough, given his opponent a little tenderizing, he throws his sword up, spinning it at a high speed, then feeds his opponent through it, essentially making ground beef out of the loser. It's a little bit like watching meat get processed at a butcher shop. It's scary to watch, but it's probably even scarier to experience. Much like the lava pit fatality like I mentioned earlier, you see your death coming towards you as you inch closer and closer to that blade. It is utterly terrifying. At number 5, Kung Lao, Razor's Edge. But speaking of slicing your opponent, Kung Lao's Razor's Edge fatality also ends with the opponent in pieces. Kung Lao and his signature razor-rimmed hat aren't something that you'd want to mess with. Although in the games he is an outspoken pacifist, not wanting to do harm to others, he will not hesitate to slice and dice you like an Arby's sandwich if the moment comes. Many of his fatalities incorporate his razor-rimmed hat, and one of his scariest fatalities, Razor's Edge, sees the opponent getting quite familiar with that blade. We see him kick his opponent to the ground, where he proceeds to take off his hat, spinning it on the ground like some type of mega gnarly buzzsaw. Then he slowly drags his opponent through the saw, cutting them vertically down the middle. It's scary to watch his opponent scream in pain and fear as it gets sawed in half, but according to the men I know who've seen this fatality, they say it's extra hard to watch because the slicing starts at the junk. Either way, it's hard to watch and super gory. At number 4, Baraka, food for thought. Have you ever experienced like a really bad headache? Like the kind that makes your eyes sensitive to light that's just crippling? Well, after hearing about Baraka and his fatality, you might feel a little better about your headache and be thankful that it wasn't brought on by this toothy behemoth. Baraka is considered one of the deadliest characters in the Mortal Kombat franchise, with his retractable blades extending from his arms and his razor-sharp teeth perfectly suited for this cannibalistic guy, and after seeing his fatalities, you will never again question his brutality and strength. One of his most terrifying fatalities, food for thought, is one that I will never get out of my head. We see him literally rip off his opponent's face while they're still alive, of course. Then he rips off their faceplate, exposing their brain, and then he rips their brain out and proceeds to take a big old bite out of it. It's scary to watch the anatomy of his opponent be revealed like that, showing their face muscles and bones, but it's also scary to think about the fact that the victim here is still alive through all of this, and the pain must be unreal. At number 3, Noob Saibot, Double Trouble. My boy Noob here is quite the character. His backstory is incredible, and his powers even more so. Being the embodiment of pure evil, he's bound to have some crazy powers and even crazier fatalities. By using teleportation, dark energy, strength, and even his trusty sickle, he's able to brutally end his opponents in a bunch of different and albeit creative ways. One of his scariest fatalities is his Double Trouble move, and I have to say it is quite something. In this fatality, Noob uses his sickle to eviscerate his opponent, then reaches his hand into their insides, pumping dark energy into them. He then uses the dark energy to create a clone, which crawls out of the opponent's mouth, busting their head open and just really causing a horribly gory sight. The sound effects make this scene even harder to watch because of the squishy blood and gut sounds and the cracking and crunching of the loser's bones as Noob breaks free of their body. I cringe every single time I see it. At number 2, Devora, New Species. Now, I had to include Devora on this list not only because her moves are terrifying, but also because she's part bug, and that is just a nightmare for me. Now, because of the fact that she is part wasp or something, her fatalities often play on that, as she uses her arms to pin and stab her opponents, or she uses some other buggy trick like swarms of bugs to her advantage and such. The scariest fatality in her arsenal is New Species, and I'm telling you, if you have an extreme phobia of bugs, just skip to the next number. Basically, in this fatality, she pins down her opponent and pumps them full of insect eggs and other gross substances, eventually causing her opponent to erupt with insect legs and splitting their head open to reveal a spider. It is horribly gruesome and looks so painful, and there's no indication of when the opponent actually dies. They become paralyzed after consuming the eggs, but after that, they could very well still be alive until their head splits open as the spider takes hold of its new host. I'd say I want to find out more about this, but that would be a complete lie. Get me the hell away from this creature. At number 1, Mileena, Tasty Treat. I put this one at number 1 because when I watched this fatality scene, I couldn't help but feel a little squeamish. Mileena and her scary sharp smile already sends a little chill down my spine, but being the vicious mutant that she is, she's bound to have some other violent moves in the game. Her fatalities are gory and violent, as many of them have something to do with her signature piranha mouth, but out of all of her moves, her tasty treat fatality is definitely one of the scariest. Sharp Tooth here starts her fatality off by pushing her opponent to the ground, then starts clawing at their stomach, ripping them in half, and then finally takes bites out of her opponent's innards. To me, the scariest part of this entire fatality is the fact that their victim here is still trying to move away from Mileena. Like, as she's clawing at them and cutting them in half, they're using their last bit of energy to scooch their top half away from her, trailing their guts behind them, but eventually succumbing to Mileena's viciousness. It must be scary to be the one getting attacked, but it's also very hard to watch. Now, before I wrap up the video, I want to know what other fatalities should be included on this list. So if there are some more scary fatalities that you'd like to see, leave them down in the comments and maybe we'll do a part 2. Anyways, that's been our list of the top 10 scariest Mortal Kombat fatalities. Thank you so much for watching. I've been your host, Bree Room, and until next time, stay safe out there, don't get into any fights like these, and have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.